Hey, this is Ryan from Rocket SaaS, and you're listening to the SaaS Marketing Weekly podcast, the show that gives you actionable marketing strategies and campaign ideas to rocket your SaaS business. And if you want even more SaaS marketing ideas, go to saasmarketingweekly.com to join my free newsletter. Hello there, welcome back to SaaS Marketing Weekly. This week we're going to be doing something slightly different. Rather than me recording a pod, I'm going to be uploading the audio of a webinar that we did last week, because this was by far the best webinar we've ever done based on the amount of questions that we had at the end, the positive feedback we've received, the leads that the business has generated from it, which has been incredible. So it was clearly a great webinar that resonated really well with the audience. So I thought I might as well upload it to the pod. I think it should be fine to be audio only. There was a slideshow that we were presenting with it, but there weren't many slides with diagrams, things like that. So you should be able to follow quite easily just as the podcast. But when you are listening, if you do think, I would quite like to see that slide, go onto the Rocket SaaS YouTube channel, just search for Rocket SaaS in the YouTube search bar. You should find us quite easily. And you can watch the whole thing there. So the title of it is How to Create a SaaS Demand Gen Campaign on a Small Budget. It's hosted by me and also Jamie, who is the ex-senior demand gen manager at Cognism. And that guy seriously knows his stuff about demand gen. So if you're new to demand gen or you think you have a decent understanding already, I'm pretty sure you're going to get value from it. I apologize that the audio is not quite as crisp as my usual podcasts, but it should be fine. Okay, enjoy. How to create a SaaS demand gen campaign on a small budget. I am a huge believer in demand gen. It has absolutely transformed my business, and I bootstrapped my business, so I never really had a big budget. So I wanted to create this webinar to teach you guys what is demand gen, how you can implement it into your business, and how you can really help that scale. So before we get into that, I'll tell you a little bit more about me, your host, and then we'll do a slide on Jamie as well. But I'm the founder of Rocket SaaS. So we are a marketing agency for B2B SaaS companies. I've scaled the business. I've bootstrapped it from nothing to 1.8 million in annual recurring revenue. And if you ask me what was the number one thing that drove that growth, I would say demand gen, without a doubt. So we're going to get into how Rocket SaaS have done it and how you can do that kind of thing too. I'm also the host of the podcast SaaS Marketing Weekly. So if you like this webinar, if you feel like me and Jamie know what we're talking about and you've learned something, you're going to love the podcast too. I always share SaaS marketing strategies, tips, campaign ideas, LinkedIn ads, inspiration. So yeah, you're really going to enjoy that too. But Jamie, I'll let you talk about yourself.
Great. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I'm Jamie. I'm marketing manager here at Rocket SaaS. So I've been here about a month now. Previous to Rocket SaaS, I spent about 3 years at Cognism as their senior demand generation manager. So yeah, was part of their demand generation team as they kind of built out their own demand gen strategy over the last 3 or 4 years. So looking forward to sharing what I'm learning and what I've learned at Cognism. And yeah, excited to get into it.
Awesome. All right. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to break it into 3 main chapters. The first one is what is demand gen and why is it so powerful for SaaS brands? If you're new to demand generation, you're obviously going to learn a lot. If you know what demand gen is already, you might learn something new. I hear different people describe demand generation in different ways. When I interviewed Jamie, that was one of my questions, was how would you describe demand generation? And he taught me something new. And then chapter number 2 is how to create a demand generation strategy and implementation plan in 8 steps. Anybody that's attended Rocket SaaS webinars before, I always want my webinars to be actionable. I really don't like those webinars where it's just like a couple of people talking and then at the end you come away and you think, well, that was good, but what do I actually do now? All of our webinars, you get actionable points. So if you follow those 8 steps, you're going to generate demand, you're going to increase your bottom line. And then the final chapter is talking about real world examples of successful demand gen campaigns. And if we've got time, we may well go over time because we've got so much packed into this, we're going to do some Q&A. So if you look at the bottom of Zoom, you should see a Q&A button, I think. Click on that, fire in any questions that you've got, and then at the end, we're going to go through some of those. So first of all, over to you, Jamie.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, we wanted to cover kind of what we consider demand gen to be and why we think it's powerful for SaaS brands, particularly in 2025. So just to kind of get into that, if we move to the next slide, Ryan. kind of just covering off kind of what we think demand generation is. So the way that we would describe it is basically aligning all of your marketing activities to the way that B2B buyers actually buy things in 2025. So it's about recognizing that you can't force a buyer with no need or no intent to buy what you're selling. Instead, what you're going to focus on is staying top of mind with that buyer until they move themselves in market and they are ready to buy. And the way we're going to do that is by educating that buyer about the problems that we solve, educating them about the value that we provide. And ultimately, what we're going to be looking to achieve is to optimize what I would call direct inbound demand. So demos, trials, contact us form submissions, people actively raising their hand and coming to your business saying, I want to talk to your sales team. I'm interested in what you're selling, rather than optimizing for what we'd consider more traditional marketing metrics like lead gen metrics like ebook downloads or white paper downloads, content downloads. So we're optimizing for direct inbound demand of people actively wanting to talk to your sales team.
Nice. I'll also add something about demand gen is on this webinar, you may come away thinking, oh, I've not actually learned anything new that I really thought I would, because demand gen is not a campaign. It's not like a new sort of like magic wand thing that comes in and immediately gets you loads of leads. It's more of a philosophy. It's more of like an understanding of how the buyers buy, of how they go from not hearing about your brand to hearing about your brand to engaging with your brand and then becoming a customer at the end. So it's more about when you unlock that mindset and the penny drops, that's when you start to create content, start to create ads, and start to really see the growth in it.
Cool. Yeah. So just to illustrate kind of what we was talking about on the last slide as well, like what we're ultimately trying to achieve is like, we don't want to be like the person on the left-hand side of the screen. We don't want to basically come into a sales conversation right at the end of that sales cycle. We're just one of a number of options. They don't really know much about us. They don't know much about our content or about our product. We come in right at the end of the sales cycle and we're just one of a number of options. Ultimately, what we're looking to try and achieve is we've been educating the buyer about the problems we solve, about the value we provide for a long time. They intimately understand that. So when they are ready to buy, they're going to come to us first. We're going to be first in their consideration set, and they're going to say, we're ready to buy. We want to talk to you about what you're offering.
Yeah, it's one of the most noticeable things about the sales in my business since we've been doing demand gen is that we're just not in competition very often anymore. People used to always say to us on sales calls, oh, we're speaking to 3 other agencies and we're going to pick the best one. Whereas now people come to us and they go, we've been following you for months. We know who you are. We've got the budget. We want to work with you. And I'm like, great. That makes a sale quite easy. As opposed to, previously we used to just be competing. And that is one of the most powerful things about demand gen.
Yeah. And just to kind of touch on why we think demand gen matters and why this all matters so much, basically, is that basically we have a starting point of basically in any one market at any given time, around 5% of your market are actively going to be researching options or ready to buy right now. They're actively going to be looking to buy what you're selling right now. But the far larger majority, around 95%, are not going to be looking for what you're selling. They're not going to be in a buying cycle. They're not going to be looking for what you're selling. They're not going to have any need or interest, but they could be influenced over time. So basically what we believe you need to succeed are 2 very different streams of marketing aimed at those 2 groups of people. Because if we accept that that's true, we accept that those are 2 very different groups. So you wouldn't talk to them in the same way. So we're going to have a stream of activity that's set up to capture existing demand from the 5%. We obviously want to capture the demand from those people who are ready to buy, but we're not just going to stop there. We're actively going to try and create new demand from the 95% who aren't ready to buy, who aren't looking. But what I'd like to add here at this point is within that 95%, although none of those people are in market, there are different audiences within that 95%. And I think Ryan's going to touch on a little bit now how you can kind of break that audience down.
Yeah, so the buyer journey pyramid, this was one of the biggest like penny dropping things for me becoming a marketer that really helped me understand how to market to more people, basically. So if you look at this pyramid, if you add up all the numbers, it makes up 100%. So that is 100% of your target audience, 100% of everyone that could buy your product. So what you've got at the top, you've got typically around 3 to 5% of people that are what we call hot buyers. They are buying now, meaning they are having sales calls with you, maybe your competitors as well. They're booking demos. They've unlocked the budget. They're ready to go. But obviously, that's a very small percentage of people. You've then got about 15% of people that are gathering information. So they decided that they want a solution to their problem, and they're Googling, they're looking at your website, they're looking at competitors' websites, but they're not quite reaching out to you yet, but they are definitely looking for your solution. Now, most companies make the mistake of only marketing to those people that are looking, which is only 20% of your audience. So, for example, they're only doing Google ads, or if they are doing LinkedIn ads or Meta ads, it's very bottom of the funnel ads saying, book a demo today. We're a HR platform that helps you reduce employee churn. Book a demo today. People are not going to book a demo unless they're looking. So what we find with so many businesses is that they're just leaving 80% of the market just on the table. So if you start to understand that 20% of your audience are aware that they've got a problem, but they're not actively seeking a solution. So let me try and give you an example. An example would be, let's say if your SaaS company is targeting construction companies and your SaaS platform like digitalizes processes for construction businesses. One of the problems that construction businesses will have is that they're still on site, literally with a clipboard and pen and paper, noting down everything. Or maybe they're using Excel and Microsoft Word to log things. That's got compliance issues written all over it. Mistakes are being made, data's being lost. They're aware they've got a problem and they're not happy about it, but they're not yet searching for a solution. That's very, very common. And then you've got an even bigger slice of the audience. 60% of people are not aware they've even got a problem. They're doing pen and paper clipboards, they're doing Excel and Microsoft Word, but we've been doing that for 20 years. That's how I got trained to do it. I didn't know that was a problem. So with demand generation, you start to create content, not just for the people at the top, but also the 80% of people that are not yet actively looking for a solution. And when you start to create content that resonates with that 80% of people, you just unlock such a bigger audience and you can push them higher up the pyramid. So yeah, hopefully that resonates as well. But back to you, Jamie.
Yeah. So I think it's important to kind of touch on why we think there is an issue with what we'd consider the more traditional approach in B2B, which has kind of been employed over the last 15, 20 years, which we would call like a typical lead gen approach. So what that typically looks like is a company will serve gated ebooks or gated white papers to their audience, try and capture the details of people in their audience so they can get those contacts into their CRM or into their marketing automation platform. And then what will happen from there is probably one of two things. Either the marketing team will send them down a very complex email nurturing path, kind of serving a bunch of pushy messages until you kind of try and force the buyer to buy from the back of your emails. Or you just hand that information, those contacts over to the sales team, and they do a similar thing where they're going outbound with outbound sequences and calls and berating the buyer to try and force them into buying. The issue with this approach is that ultimately, like the people who downloaded that ebook, who downloaded that white paper, there's no evidence that they have any buying intent at all. So at the point they downloaded that ebook, most likely they just wanted to read the ebook. So that's a problem, because ultimately, if we start focusing our time on people who had no intent to buy in the first place, we're going to waste our time trying to nurture these people down to booking a sales call, or we're going to waste our sales team's time by kind of serving them junk leads with no buying intent, who they're going to call and be frustrated because they can't actually convert any of these leads. So we consider this to be why this kind of old school lead gen approach has become increasingly inefficient, because ultimately what it does is it prioritizes the short term over building trust and credibility with your buyer over the long term. On the flip side to that, why we think buyers will prefer what we're considering a demand generation approach is that the whole emphasis is on, well, if we're not going to gate our content and just try and capture contacts, what we're actually going to do is we're going to give all the information about the problems that we solve and about our product friction free. We're not going to gate that information. We're going to give that to them friction free all the time, always on. And ultimately, that means we're going to optimize for that content to be consumed. We're not just trying to capture details. We're actively trying to drive people to our content and get that content consumed so we can make an impression on that buyer. What this naturally means as well is that we're not going to be focused on what I just mentioned around kind of serving a bunch of sequence of pushy sales messages to kind of try and force that buyer into a sales conversation. That's not going to be our priority. Ultimately, what actually happens is, because we're focusing on giving away our information friction free, we're actually going to the emphasis comes on us to create really high value content. So we're going to be focused on building educational, insightful, and relevant content that actually helps buyers solve their problems. Because ultimately, if the content's not working, if it's not good, then it's not going to make any impression on the buyer. And we're not going to build any relevant awareness. We're not going to build any affinity with that buyer. It's very unlikely they're going to remember us when they go in market, which I think is the important point here, is that the whole approach is around, we're focusing on letting the buyer come to us when they're ready. We're focusing on declared intent from the buyer. So instead of focusing on trying to drive them, push them towards a sales conversation, we're focusing on building trust, removing friction, and letting buyers lead the journey and come to us when they're ready, after they've kind of consumed our content, learned about our product, learned about the problems that we solve through all of our content efforts.
Yeah, and you can also think of the analogy of booking a holiday. So when you book a holiday, you have a chat with your partner, you do a bit of research online, you shortlist a few different locations you can go to and hotels, and all the information that you could possibly need is readily available. You can go through all the different hotel websites, you can see all the pricing, you can go through Google Images forever, you can go on various YouTube videos, you can see all reviews on Trustpilot and TripAdvisor. And you never get pushed by a pushy salesperson. You have a little think about it, and then you sleep on it for a few weeks, and then you revisit it, and then you make a little bit of a decision, and then it goes a bit further because you've done a bit more research, and it's all just there for you. And then you make the decision when you are ready. You're not pushed down some funnel. There's no gated content that's hidden from you. It's all just available for you to buy on your terms, which makes for a very pleasurable buying experience. Buying a holiday is a pretty nice experience, and that's what the kind of analogy of how you want to be doing your sales and your marketing is. You want to make it an enjoyable experience on their terms rather than forcing them down this funnel that they don't want to go down.
Yeah, I think the final points we wanted to touch on before we moved on as well is, like, if anyone's kind of sitting there and has already been considering this, or you're just asking, like, is this the right approach for me? I think particularly if you're a smaller SaaS business, there's two things I'd 100% kind of focus on answering before you kind of throw your weight behind this approach. First of all, have you validated your product market fit? So demand generation and marketing more generally is a multiplier. It can't create traction where there is none already. Like, it can multiply your existing traction and where you're seeing success. But if you haven't had any sales yet, if you haven't even had any kind of traction with outbound, maybe that's where I'd kind of recommend starting before you invest budget and time and resources into a demand generation approach. And secondly, when it comes to demand generation, you have to be willing to play the long game and understand what that means. So like we mentioned, we're focusing on, under a demand generation approach, building awareness and trust with that 95% who aren't ready to buy. So that does mean accepting that 95%, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to force them to buy or kind of persuade them to buy if they haven't got a need. And that's something you have to recognize and accept if you're going to kind of embrace this approach.
Great. All right, let's get into chapter 2 then, which is how to create a demand generation strategy for your SaaS business in 8 steps. So step number 1 is to define your ICP, your ideal customer profile. Now, I apologize to any experienced marketers on the webinar who've just rolled their eyes thinking, yeah, I know that. That's an obvious place to start, but we had to include it because so many businesses don't. Now, remember, the title of this webinar is how to do it on a small budget. And if you have a small budget, you really need to get tight on your ICP. You can't be having a broad audience that you're targeting. You really, really must define that. So we could do a whole webinar on how to define the ICP. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give you one slide. If you do think your ICP definition needs work, I suggest you do some additional research after this webinar before you dive into demand gen, because it's so critical that you get this right. But you need to know exactly who you're targeting. So the classic things that we always start with: industries, the company size, as in headcount, the location of the companies, and then the revenue of the company. Those are usually the big 4 things that you want to start with. You can obviously get a lot more granular, but you've at least got to get those things nailed down. Then roles and personas. That's when we get into the individual. So is it decision makers? You also want to be influencing some of the end users. So what are their roles? What are their job titles? And I'd really recommend, a lot of your startups, is analyzing your existing customers. Look for trends, watch back those sales calls, what do your existing customers all have in common with each other? Or if you've got a wide range of customers, which are your favorite ones in terms of they give you the most revenue, or they're the best ones to work with, or they're the ones that have got the most scalability to them. And you want to map out their pain points. What problems are they actively trying to solve? That is a key point about any marketing, not just demand generation, is understanding what are their problems, what is keeping them up at night. There are tools that can help you do this. So customer interviews, I'd highly recommend interviewing your existing customers. Just reach out to them and say, we're just doing some research at the moment, trying to grow the business. It'd be really helpful if you could just jump on a call with us and survey them. Ask them, why did you sign up with us? What were your pain points? What were your problems? Also, you can survey the market. So not your existing customers, the people that are not yet your customers. So you can use tools like Pollfish, relatively low-cost surveying tool. You've got Winter, which is a more premium version, but they're great tools to reach out to the market, ask them questions. What are their pain points? What are their problems? What's keeping them up at night? And that'll really help you define your ICP. Then you've got tools like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, Cognism, Apollo to help you understand your market size. And you really want to try and define that down. So that's all about defining the ICP. And once you have that, you then want to audit your demand capture. So your demand capture was that 5% that Jamie was talking about earlier. That's the 5% of people that they are ready to buy. Okay, so if you cannot convert those people, don't invest in the 95. Don't try and generate demand, because you're going to push people into this 5%, but you're not going to convert them. So what's the point? You're going to waste a lot of money. You really need to fix that first. And so how you do that, typically the main things that we see is messaging. That is the number 1, 2, and 3 problem that I see with SaaS companies. Jamie will agree with me, is messaging. We go on so many B2B SaaS websites, look at so many LinkedIn ads, and the content is just poor. You're probably nodding your head, a lot of you, thinking, yep, our messaging is really poor. You go onto our website and not many people understand what we do. You have to fix that first. Don't spend a load of money on ads and generating the demand from this 95% if the people that are already aware of you don't understand what you do. So look at your messaging. The older generation of people on this webinar might remember this guy from this TV advert from Ron Seal does exactly what it says on the tin. And that's one of the slogans that I still use to this day. That's where I would start, is describing your product without trying to use clever buzzwords, clever phrases. Just describe it exactly what it says on the tin. Who are you targeting? What benefits do you bring? And how do you deliver those benefits? I recommend a book called Obviously Awesome by April Dunford. I'd check that out. I'd also check out my podcast, SaaS Marketing Weekly. I do quite a lot of episodes about messaging because it is such a key point that you must get sorted. And then over to you, Jamie, about improving your product marketing.
I think this really ties in with what you were just talking about as well. So like in terms of positioning and messaging, I think your product marketing is incredibly important as a SaaS business, particularly when it comes to actually being to efficiently capture demand from people ready to buy. If people don't understand intimately the value that your product provides, its value relative to competitors and alternatives, what differentiates it, and also how they'll use that in the day-to-day and what that workflow looks like, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to either take you up on an offer when you're trying to capture demand, or have a positive conversation when they actually enter into a sales call. It's all much easier if they understand the information intimately, which is why improving your product marketing is an incredibly important thing to invest in. So really simply things like case studies, interactive demos, testimonials, platform graphics to show it in action, and landing pages just to communicate those key value props. All of those things are super important, and you need to get crystal clear on being able to communicate the value of your product, as that's going to be essential for people to be able to take you up on your offer down the line and smooth the path to conversion.
Yeah, we meet a lot of clients who say to me, when I get people on a sales call or when I get people on a demo, they love it. They love our product, and we've got a really good close rate when we get people on demo. But my problem is I can't get enough people on the demo. So I say to them, okay, well, if they love the product so much when they get on the demo, we need to bring that love higher up the funnel. We need to get them to see the product before they jump on the demo. It may sound obvious, but there's so many SaaS businesses that are not doing it. And there's a lot of issues that I see around the visuals of the product. So people often will take a screenshot of their software and just paste it onto the website, and it looks awful. You're leaning in, so your nose is almost touching the monitor, going, I don't understand what that product says, and you're confusing people. You confuse, you lose. Take a look at the screenshot down the bottom here. This is from the Slack website. Most of you know what Slack looks like. It doesn't really look like this. It's far more detailed, complicated looking. It's got far smaller font size and lots of different options. Slack have redesigned this just for their website. They pumped up the font, they stripped out all the detail. Still looks like Slack, still got the right branding, but it really helps simplify the product and the understanding of it. So when you come onto the site, you go, oh, that looks cool. I get it instantly, as opposed to being like, what's that? I don't understand it. And the screenshot above here is an interactive demo from Storylane. So some of you will be familiar with that. You can literally have a demo that people can scroll through, kind of like a PowerPoint on the website. Just help people play with the product. And a lot of people think, oh, no, I won't do that because then it means people won't book demos. So you want to A/B test it, but generally, if you show people the product and it's a decent product, decent UI, that will make people go, oh, that looks cool. I want to book a demo to learn more. So you want to really work on your product marketing, as Jamie was saying.
Yeah, and now coming on to this point, I think this is really important, that I think it's often overlooked that as marketers, often we can capture a lead, someone submits the demo form, and we'll be like, great, job done. We've done our bit. But I think that's a huge missed opportunity, particularly in your demand capture efforts. Basically, I think that after you've captured that lead, obviously when they enter the sales funnel, you can have input and understand intimately, is that buying process optimized so that your lead is getting down to opportunities and revenue in an efficient way? And marketers should proactively try and figure that stuff out. So auditing things like the marketing sales handoff, is that as effective as it could be? Your routing, is that working properly? Is the follow-up as valuable as it could be? All of those things combine to actually make an impact on, is the lead progressing through the sales funnel as well as it could do? And I think marketers often can ignore that and forget about that. But ultimately, revenue and pipeline is the ultimate goal. That's what we're all trying to achieve as a business. So it's important to kind of keep eyes on that as well and put your best foot forward. Yeah, and then finally, what we wanted to touch on just to round off demand capture. So we just wanted to kind of talk about what a typical demand capture setup is going to look like for a B2B SaaS business. What I will say and qualify this with is that this is all going to vary depending on your particular buyer and on your particular product. It's always going to be relative to you. But just to give an idea of how we'd set up demand capture activity for a very typical B2B SaaS business, where we're going to be looking to focus our demand capture efforts is on what we would call intent channels. So these are channels where buyers are actively making buying decisions, comparing options, researching options. And we want to be present and directing attention towards our offering in those channels. So like for a typical B2B SaaS business, those channels could look like, for example, a big one's going to be Google and Bing ads, people actively searching on those search engines for things like CRM software, for example, people who are searching high intent searches on those engines. We want to capture that traffic, drive it towards our offering, and ultimately capture that interest and get those solution aware buyers towards our product. Alongside that, another really typical channel that we would kind of look to optimize on is review platforms like G2 and Capterra. So these are, again, it's a channel where buyers are actively researching options and comparing options. So things like, do you have a listing? Do you have a profile? Is that listing optimized to capture demand? Do you have reviews? All of those things are super important to be putting your best foot forward to those people who are ready to buy. And then finally as well, similar to the Google and Bing ads channel, Google SEO and search engine SEO at the bottom of the funnel. So this is basically optimizing for keywords that buyers are actively using to compare solutions and appearing organically for those keywords. And we're going to touch a little bit more on that bottom of funnel SEO point in a bit as well.
Nice. All right. Step number 3 is to define awareness channels and content types for the 95%. So this is the 95% of the people that are not in that buying cycle at the minute. So, sorry, this is your slide, Jamie. Okay.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, just basically on the flip side to those intent channels that I just mentioned, when you're actually looking to create demand with the 95% who aren't looking to buy, where you're going to be looking to focus your efforts is what we would call awareness channels. So those awareness channels, those are channels where your buyers aren't necessarily comparing options. They're not necessarily looking to buy things. What they're looking to do is be educated, be entertained. And that's a place where you can reach those buyers with your messaging, with your content, with your points of view, with your product information as well. And really for a typical SaaS business, again, it's going to be very different depending on your particular business. But for a typical SaaS business, big ones are going to be like LinkedIn. LinkedIn's going to be a massive one for a lot of B2B SaaS businesses. That's where a lot of buyers are spending time learning about their industry, learning about their job, trying to improve, getting information. Meta, although considered more of a B2C platform, your buyers are still present there, and it can still be, in a lot of cases, a good opportunity to get your content, your points of view, and your messaging in front of those people and start building awareness and creating demand with those people. Reddit, becoming increasingly important for B2B. So particularly in niche communities related to B2B topics, these are really relevant buyers where people are having relevant conversations that you can contribute to, or you can serve advertising to get your messaging and content in front of these people. Your email lists. So although this is considered a little bit more old school than some of the other channels I just mentioned, this is still a massive, massive part of most B2B SaaS mixes. Ultimately, your buyers are spending still every day in their email inbox. And so there is still a massive opportunity to get in front of those buyers, be top of mind, create demand, and be there until they're ready to buy. Podcasts and YouTube, again, as well, becoming increasingly important. These are great vehicles for us to, again, get our content, get our messaging, get our points of view across. And then exhibition events. So again, consider a little bit more old school than some of the other channels, but still very central to most B2B businesses. And again, it's still a massive opportunity for what we'd consider to create awareness among your market, be top of mind with that buyer, and create affinity with that buyer, and get your messaging and your brand in front of that buyer through the year.
Yeah, something I'll add about meta ads. I know meta ads, Facebook and Instagram is a kind of controversial one for a lot of B2B companies. In my experience, it's not great for lead generation. You often get a lot of junk leads coming through, a lot of Yahoos and Gmail or just spam. But it is very good for brand awareness and keeping top of mind. Like a lot of sales that we make, for example, people say to us, "Oh, yeah, I've seen Rocket SaaS everywhere. I've seen you all over my Facebook, all over your Instagram, all over my Instagram and my LinkedIn as well. So I just had to get in touch." And it's a very low cost platform compared to LinkedIn. So yeah, people often make the mistake of trying to get leads from it and then think, "Oh, it doesn't work," and turning it off. But particularly for retargeting, it's such a cheap way to retarget people. People come onto your website and then they start seeing you on Meta. That's a very low cost way to keep you top of mind. So I wouldn't give up on Meta. But yeah, what you want to do is you want to start by defining your weekly long form content type. So now we're going to get into content creation. And I'm going to talk you through like how we create a lot of content at scale, even though we don't have a huge content creation department. And the thing that I highly recommend is the first thing you want to do is define what is going to be your weekly long form content type. And the way to do it is you want to focus on your strengths and also your resources. So you need to pick one of these 3 things: long form video, podcasting, or blogging. Long form video is at the top because that's the best. If you feel like you've got the charisma, you've got the presentarness inside you, if you've got the equipment or you're willing to invest in the equipment, you've got the time, then if you can be doing long form video, like 10-minute plus YouTube videos, that is the best place to start by far, because this slide later on is going to talk to you all about repurposing that content. So that is the best place to start. If you hate the idea of doing that, if you hate the idea of presenting, if it's just not for you, which is absolutely fine, move to podcasting instead. That's where I'm at the moment. I started doing long form video. I did about 10 YouTube videos. You can see them online. But it didn't quite work for me, because I had a baby. I kind of ran out of time. So I was like, I can't be doing these videos anymore. Like the process takes too long, too much editing, and it's just not working for me. So I moved to podcasts, which is much more manageable for me. I can just churn them out much quicker, and I enjoy doing them much more. So that was the one for me. I would like to go back to YouTube videos later on, unless we pop another baby out. But anyway, but if you hate the idea of podcasts, if you hate the sound of your own voice, then you can move to blogging. But you have to do one of those three things, is my recommendation. And that content needs to come from a thought leader in the business. If you are the founder of the business, you are presumably one of the thought leaders, so it needs to come from you. If you are the marketing person in the business and you wouldn't consider yourself to be a thought leader, then you need to collaborate with one of the founders or senior execs in the business to create that content, because you do not want this content to be generic, which is just a real big issue in the industry, in every industry at the moment, is generic crap content, which we're going to get onto in a minute. So I'm going to teach you how to involve the thought leaders to get this content out there. But the key thing is that you pick one of these things and you do it weekly. So step 4, after you've decided what your weekly long form content is going to be, you need to start creating that content. So create high value thought leadership content. And it all needs to be about the problems that your solution solves. You need to create content that helps your audience solve their problems. And I don't mean sales content by saying, oh, just use our SaaS platform. It should be helping them solve their problems, not necessarily with you. One of the best exercises that I ever did about 3-4 years ago was I was challenged. I went on this course and they challenged me to write down on a whiteboard 100 problems that my target audience suffers from. It took me about 2 hours, but I got through it. And then I highlighted in red marker 12 of the most burning problems that I felt was keeping my ICP up at night. The reason it was 12 is because there's 12 months in the year. And then once I picked those 12, I then created 4 subtopics from each of those main topics. The reason why it's 4 is because there's 4 weeks in a month. So just by doing that, I've suddenly got a content calendar, a weekly content calendar for the whole year. And that's a brilliant exercise to do as a marketer. ChatGPT can support you in doing this, but I would say don't do it unless you've really run dry of ideas. Please try to do it on your own. I did it before ChatGPT came out and I managed to get it done. So yeah, try and do it yourself. If you use ChatGPT, it just won't be quite as pure. You won't have the passion. It'll just kind of be generic in there. So I highly recommend that exercise. If you've got a team of people, get together and do it as a team. You don't do it on your own. But yeah, you want to create your content calendar, something like that. This is an example of a HR SaaS business. So you can see in January, the topic is employee churn. These are the dates that in this case, it's blogs are going to be published. Here's the subtopic for each of the 4 employee churn main topics. That's the medium, and there's the link to the blog. So you want to map all of this out. Now, with the content calendar, I've given you an example of doing a 12-month content calendar, and that needs to be flexible. You know, your industry is going to be evolving and changing with AI and legislations and various different things that are happening. As new things come to your mind, as new things come into the industry, slot them in there and just nudge the calendar back. So your content calendar will end up being like 18 months long if you keep throwing in new things. But what I want you to do is I want you to get structure. I don't want you to just come and sit down at your desk with a blank canvas every week and go, oh, I've got to create some sort of content here, what we're going to do. You need to get structure, you need to get accountability in there, and you need to get repeatability, and that is how you are going to really stick to this and create great content. So I recommend the content calendar if that works for you. And my tip is to try to batch it. If you try and create new content every single week, you're going to slip. You're going to fail, you're going to get busy, you're going to get ill or whatever. So I recommend you try to batch it. I try and create 4 pieces of content in one go. So when I'm doing my podcast, SaaS Marketing Weekly, I try and record 4 episodes in one day. And that's a real nice feeling of relief because I know that I never have to create another episode until 4 weeks' time. So I just leave it. So, and obviously then you get in the flow and you just create things quicker. So that's a tip. But yeah, demand generation requires buy-in and input from thought leaders in the business. This is absolutely critical. So when you've got your content calendar, let me go back to that employee churn example. Let's say, right, January, I've decided I want to create 4 bits of long form content about employee churn. Who in the business, or it could even be a partner or even a client, who is the expert on that topic? Who's the expert on employee churn? It could be yourself, or it could be someone else in the business. And what you want to do is you want to interview those people. If it is yourself, then obviously you don't have to interview yourself, but you might find a benefit of getting someone else in the business to interview you. It depends on how good you are at kind of getting stuff done from a blank canvas. If you talk it through with someone, it's often a great way of creating content. But anyway, if it is someone else in the business, when you've got that content calendar, write the interview questions. Get them on a Zoom call or a Google Meets call and interview them and record it with a tool like Otter or Fathom. And if you can get that thought leader speaking for half an hour, you're going to get about 4,000 words in the transcripts. And those 4,000 words are absolute gold. That is going to allow you to create and spin off all this content using the power of AI, which we're going to get onto in a minute. So that is one of my top recommendations, is to interview someone every single month before you start creating that content. That will save you from creating generic content or using AI to create awful content. So you want to repurpose your content into multiple formats. So when you picked your first long form piece of content, if it's a YouTube video or if it's a podcast, you record that or you create that piece of content, and then you can easily repurpose it into LinkedIn short video snippets or YouTube shorts. You can then take your long form piece of content, take the transcript from it and turn it into a blog. You can turn your blog into an email newsletter. The email newsletter can easily be repurposed into 5 LinkedIn posts. Going back to your original long form piece of content, if it performs well, you can create a webinar off the back of it. Your webinar can be recorded and transcribed and easily turned into a guide once you've added some design on top of it. So you can see when you created that one weekly long form piece of content at the beginning, all these other things can be spun off and can be created very easily. And the beauty of it is you don't have to do it yourself. You can use a virtual assistant, you can use someone else in your team, you can use an agency like Rocket SaaS, and you can use AI to easily create and repurpose these things. So once you've got this motion really flowing, all you have to do is create the first thing. Then you train your team or your virtual assistant how to use AI to create all of these. And the beauty of it is that these things won't be generic rubbish content because it's all come from that thought leadership at the beginning. And that's the kind of magic of how you can repurpose and get this content out really quickly. So I would say that ChatGPT is terrible at creating fresh content with little context. If you go into ChatGPT and say, write me a blog about HR employee churn, it's going to create awful content. But it can create brilliant content when you give it enough context. So look at this prompt, for example. Take my video transcript and turn it into a blog article. So you drag and drop your TXT file of your video transcript or your podcast transcript, ask it to restructure it with headers and subheaders, and then follow the same writing style as my other blogs. And then it creates really impressive content because it's not creating its own content, which is going to be rubbish. It's repurposing your words, your thought leadership, or whoever that else is in the business. And then step 6 is to build a funnel. Now, demand generation is not actually about funneling people. However, I am going to do this slide to talk about creating a funnel. So bear with me on this one. Jamie and I kind of went back and forth on this for a little bit. But in terms of understanding what content to create, in what order and where you're missing content, I think going back to the traditional funnel is a great way for you to kind of understand what content needs to be created. So the traditional layers of the funnel are awareness, interest, desire, action. So this is one of the Rocket SaaS funnels. We've got blogs here at the top, teaching our audience how to solve a common problem of how to get more SaaS leads. We got ebooks, we got the podcast, we got videos. Then we move on to the interest layer, which is our webinar recordings or this new webinar you're watching now. We've got scorecards, quizzes, newsletters, and then you get into the desire section, which is case study videos, articles, quotes, review websites. Then you've got the bottom of the funnel, which is various different landing pages. So we mapped that all out in a funnel, and then we got to work on creating all of those bits of content. So that just really helped give us structure, which is I recommend kind of where you start. Because if you start thinking about demand gen, it's a bit all over the place and it's quite hard to kind of understand where you need to start. But if you start by creating it in a funnel, and then Jane will explain what actually happens in reality.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely just kind of touching back on what Ryan said, like it's definitely helpful to structure the content out and just get an idea, particularly like stages of awareness, like what stage that's meeting. But like Ryan said, like with demand gen, you're not trying to funnel people or like expecting that you can serve a piece of content and then you nudge them down and then you get another piece of content and you nudge them down further and another piece of content, you nudge them down further until they buy. That's not the assumption that we're making. It comes back to what we said earlier, which was basically the buyer leads the buying process. That's the reality of buying in B2B in 2025. So if we accept that, we accept that the buyer ultimately is going to come inbound when they're ready. They're going to push themselves in market themselves. We can't force that. So the whole point of demand gen is that we serve the content to them and let them self-serve and dip into the content that's relevant for them. We can't really understand what stage they're at. But ultimately, we can stay top of mind with them. We can educate them about the problems we solve. We can educate them about our value. And then when they're ready to buy, they'll come in market and we'll capture them with the demand capture activities that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah. So capture people originally with a cold layer and then give them everything. Allow them to browse and see your content as much as they want, no matter where they are at the funnel, just coming in and out of the funnel. So step 7.
Yeah, I think here we just want to touch on kind of aligning sales and marketing and particularly a common problem you might face. So basically, I think when you actually move to this approach, often I think what you'll find is that sales particularly, and your exec team as well, might be happy that you're trying to optimize towards more high quality conversions, like demos, like trials. You're going to have a shared goal that's really tied to pipeline and revenue around high intent inbound leads. So naturally, you're going to try and align yourself more with sales just by doing that. However, one problem that you will find is that particularly under a more classic lead gen approach, the typical approach that a company will take is much more easily trackable and it's much more easy to kind of measure. So for example, like if you're running a lead gen approach, what you might do is send some traffic to a landing page where you are advertising an ebook. You capture someone on that page, they enter your CRM and marketing automation platform. You can send them a load of emails that are easily to track, or you can hand them over to sales and you kind of have your lead volume to fall back on. And it's much more easy to kind of put together in a neat, tidy, easy way. Obviously, if we're doing what we're saying to optimize for is we're trying to optimize for people to come inbound when they're ready and optimize for more and more people over time to come inbound to us when they're ready. It's not going to be as easily trackable and it's not going to be as easy to track exactly what touch point influenced them to come inbound at what one time. So that's going to be a problem. And I think the key thing that a marketer is going to be asking at that point is like, how do I demonstrate that my campaigns are working? How do I understand that all this approach is making sense? And I think if we move to the next slide, Ryan, what I would say in terms of where to get started is, we should move one forward as well, where to get started in terms of trying to figure out and answer that question, is this working, are things moving in the right direction, is you're going to split your metrics into 2 kind of buckets. So at the very start, when you're kind of getting your campaigns up and running for the first time, you're going to be looking at leading metrics in particular. So you're going to be looking at engagement metrics around things like, are your LinkedIn ad CTRs and engagement rates performing? Is your content performing when people reach it? Like, is people engaging with the content on the page? Is the scroll depth's good? You're going to be looking at your web traffic. Is that going up in the way you want? You're going to kind of group all those metrics together just to kind of get a pulse on, are your campaigns from when you started, are they improving in performance? Are things ticking up in the way that you'd want to see? You're going to use that as your kind of pulse to understand, okay, the campaigns are performing in the way we kind of want them to. And so ultimately what you're going to rely on afterwards are the more lagging metrics to show that the overall approach is working. So you're going to start to see your demo bookings go up, trials go up if everything's working the way it should. And ultimately what you're going to use is like that increase in overall inbound demo volume. When you start to see that, you can kind of use that and blend it with your other metrics in the leading side, blend both together to understand, okay, The campaigns are working and improving over time. We're also getting results at the bottom of the funnel. And I think at the very beginning, before you get too complex a measurement, this is a helpful way to look at it. And also just qualitative feedback from your sales team as well can be really, really important just to understand, is this working? Are we doing well? Are they getting better leads, basically, and having better conversations?
Great. All right. So final chapter, which is, examples of real world successful demand gen campaigns. So I'm going to talk about Rocket SaaS and what we've done to kind of go through some specific examples of content we created and how we created it. And then also how that's impacted the business. And Jamie's going to talk about experience of doing demand gen at Cognism as well. So in terms of Rocket SaaS, so sorting out our demand capture, did a lot of things here, but the main things that we did, crystal clear messaging. So that screenshot here is the headline that we have on our website: outsourced SaaS marketing for B2B brands with limited in-house resources. That is not a fancy headline. There's no buzzwords. It's not particularly clever. It is just does what it says on the tin. It shows the headline says who we are targeting, B2B SaaS brands. What do we do? Outsource SaaS marketing. And what's the pain point that we solve? Limited in-house resources. So in those 10 words, we've summarized those key 3 things. So we really worked hard on getting the messaging super, super clear. We defined our target audience. So we have 2 different audiences that we target. The first group of people that we target are SaaS founders that don't have any marketers in-house and they desperately need to start doing marketing. And then the other people that we target are slightly larger SaaS companies that do have a marketing person in-house, typically 1 or 2 people, but they are stressed, they are under-resourced, they don't have the resources to create their strategy. We come in and support them. So we've got different messages to those different buckets of people that we target. So we're very tight on our targeting. We are transparent with our pricing. You go onto our website. We don't gate our pricing. We don't make you get on a sales call to understand our pricing. Our pricing is on our website. We have pushed a lot into doing positive reviews, and we've also really sorted out our Google ads and our landing pages so that the people that are in that 5%, we capture them mainly on Google or the review websites. They come onto our website, they understand what we do, they know how much we cost. So when we get on sales calls, they're ready to go. Also, we sorted out the middle of the funnel. Social proof, lead magnets. We created a lot of case studies that we put on our website. We've really ramped up the number of case studies that we've done this year, or last year, I should say. We interviewed some of our happy customers. We turned them into ads that we push out on LinkedIn, organic social content of our customers just talking about how great we are. Written quotations, we've got those all over our website. We use those in our ads as well. We also do lead magnet campaigns like this one that you're on now. This is a webinar. Also, things like scorecards. So really good middle of funnel content. And then one of the main things that we do to push our content out is all about repurposing and rapid distribution of content. So our content starts with the podcast. I don't like sitting down with a blank Google Doc and having to write out a blog. It would take me like 3-4 hours. I don't find it particularly enjoyable. I much prefer just firing up Riverside and speaking and recording a podcast. That podcast is then the only thing that I do. I then have trained, took me a while, but I've trained my team to then take that podcast and distribute it and create other content. So I record my podcasts, sometimes, not all of them. And when I do that, my team turn it into LinkedIn video snippets. So we get those snippets out there with LinkedIn ads, LinkedIn thought leader ads, and then post them organically as well. Also, we transcribe the whole podcast. We get a TXT file, stick that into ChatGPT, very easily spin out a blog. And I'm always really happy with the blog because it's not generic. It's just my words that have come out of my mouth during the podcast, repurposed and restructured. From the blog, we then very easily do the same thing in ChatGPT, turn it into an email newsletter. It's not an email newsletter that says, click here to read our blog. It's the blog repurposed. The newsletter is a bit more snappy, not so long form, and ChatGPT is brilliant at doing that. From the blog, we turn it into 3 to 5 LinkedIn posts that I post on my personal brand. And then from that, all of those things, in this example of demand generation, I did a podcast about demand gen, video snippets, the blog, the newsletter, the LinkedIn post, started to see a lot of traction, a lot of people with very positive feedback. And I said to Jamie, this is what our audience care about. I want to do a webinar on it. And this webinar didn't take us that long to create because we already had a blog, a newsletter, and a podcast to take the content from. And then the final piece that we're going to do, which is not done yet, is we transcribed this webinar that you're on now, and we're going to turn it into an ebook, get a designer to make it look beautiful, and then we've got a campaign, another one, another great asset. So you can see from one idea at the beginning, one podcast that took me about an hour to create, it then spins off all this other content, and I wasn't really involved in much of it apart from this hosting the webinar. And how that's impacted the business. So this chart here compares Rocket SaaS in 2023, where we were doing traditional lead gen, to 2024, where we were doing demand gen. So this column, this table on the left here is about content. We increased our content output by 228%. We did the same amount of newsletters. We did a lot more blogs because we started repurposing them. We did 0 podcasts in 2023. We did 30 in 2024. Same amount of LinkedIn posts. We did more videos, more webinars, slightly more ebooks, more case studies. So big increase in content output. Conversely, we didn't increase ad spend that much. We only increased ad spend by 25%. But the result was massive. We got a 50% increase in qualified leads inbound. We got a 92% increase in sales. Really interesting stats. We've got 22% increase in sales close rate. You would think by increasing your leads, it wouldn't necessarily mean that your close rate goes up. But with demand generation, it does. People come to us and they know who we are. They've been following us for ages. They're ready to buy. We even increased our pricing quite significantly. We increased our pricing by 20%. That has had a positive impact on everything. So the revenue was up 130%. So without increasing ad spend that much, just creating a lot more content, the revenue really went up. So this graph here is the growth of Rocket SaaS. The first 3 years was pretty steady growth. And then in 2024, right here, that's January, we decided to lean in to demand gen. And you can see the business plateaued for about 6 months because we turned off all of the gated things. We started getting no MQLs. But after about 6 months, woof, started to really go up. And that's been really transformational, and that's going to continue on going. And it's all because we leaned into demand gen here, and that's the growth that's happening from it. So sorry, Jim, I'm not giving you too much time here, but you can go into your Cognism experience as well.
I'll try and zip through. So yeah, like I mentioned, I was previous to Rocket SaaS. I'd spent about 3 years at Cognism, and they've been running a demand generation strategy for about, I think, 4 years now. And it's been integral to kind of helping them grow from 5 million to, I think the last count was about 75 million ARR. They're a big company now, but I wanted to pull the most relevant lessons that I kind of learned that I think are relevant for smaller businesses as well. The first one of them is actually how they went about making the switch to demand generation from a classic lead gen approach. So I think what you'll typically find if you are running a lot of lead gen campaigns is your natural objections to kind of making this switch will be, my sales team need these downloads. This is who they go outbound to. I can't do this. And also my exec team wouldn't ever let me change anything this radically. Both very reasonable objections. But I think the process that Cognism followed it can be really helpful for other businesses as well. And it's a very gradual approach. So the first thing they did was splitting the funnel and doing a split the funnel analysis. So on the right is an actual example from their demand gen playbook course, which I highly recommend you guys check out. It's really useful. But basically what they did when they were first looking at this is that they split out all of their conversions that they were getting into 2 buckets. So low intent conversions and high intent conversions. In the low intent conversions, when the ebook downloads, the white paper downloads, any conversions where there was no explicit buying intent behind the conversion. In the high intent bucket, they put all of the demo calls, the demo requests, contact us, free trials, all those sorts of things went into the high intent bucket. And all they did was start evaluating, okay, how do those leads, how do those conversions perform once they get into the sales funnel, and what actually happens once we capture that lead. And if you look at the low intent side of that table, you can see that to close one deal, from the low intent leads, they were having to generate 500 low intent leads, and they had very weak performance through the funnel. On the high intent side of that table, you can see that they need to generate 25 high intent leads to generate one deal, and there was much stronger performance through the funnel as well. So just by breaking that data out, they were able to show their sales team, show their exec team, this is what's happening when these leads enter the funnel. And this is how they perform, and they can start to demonstrate, well, maybe we shouldn't be focusing on the low intent leads. Maybe we should focus on scaling to get more high intent leads. And just by demonstrating that data, they got some buy-in. They then moved to carving out a very small test budget. This was their next step. So I think at the time it was around 10% of the budget, something like that. And what they did, they had a hypothesis and a timeline. It was just as simple as basically saying, for the next 3 months, we are going to use this test budget to run what we consider to be demand generation campaigns. So ungated content about the problems we solve, ungated content about a product. And we're going to serve that to our audience. And after the 3 months, all we want to see at this point is, in line with the additional spend, are we seeing an increase in our inbound demo volume? From that initial experiment, they used the findings from it to kind of start validating there might be something behind this. And they leveraged that into more test budget until eventually they got to a point where they had enough buy-in to make it a full part of their strategy. And the important part of this process was they didn't necessarily go all in from the start. It wasn't a case of on day one, you flip to demand generation, you stop doing lead gen. You don't have to do everything at once. I think at the very beginning, if I remember rightly, but I can't remember the exact ratio, but I think it was around, they were still running about 70% of their campaigns were lead gen, about 30% were demand gen. And over time, they gradually scaled up, and now they only run demand generation focused campaigns. They do no typical lead gen activity. And that was built up over time. So you don't need to start straight away. And that's, I think, a really important thing. And I think following this process is a practical way to kind of make the switch without upsetting the wider business, basically. Second thing I want to cover, I'm aware of the time, so I'll try and zip through. So the second thing I want to cover is how they used content to help them to create demand. So first of all, I just want to agree with what Ryan said about using SMEs. I think this is the table stakes of having some sort of content that's going to cut through. All B2B businesses are making content, but to have any sort of cut through, you need at least original insight to be able to have some sort of differentiation for your content to cut through. So I completely agree with what Ryan was saying. I think an important lesson that I took from Cognism and where I saw success, particularly with their top of funnel content, was they invested a lot of time in what I'd consider to be show versus tell content. So what I mean by that is typical kind of tell content is basically content that tells a buyer how to do something or what to do. So an example might be 5 tips to do X, but there's no original stories or data or experiences informing that content. It's just 5 generic tips, or like why X is important. What I would consider show content to be, and it's a very subtle switch, is basically you say, this is what we did. We did X. These are the great results we had. This is the playbook we used to follow it to get there. And when you make that subtle change and you invest in that type of content, if you can start producing that, you're giving content that's letting people on valuable experiences, data, real stories. And I think that's the kind of content that really cuts through. And a good example from Cognism would be their state of cold calling report, which I've mentioned here. So this is where they broke down 10,000 cold calls. And they turned that into a state of cold calling report where they broke down all of the data into key insights for the year, and then offered advice from SMEs on those particular findings. And then that report, that's not about telling them how to do cold calling without any sort of original ideas. It's about letting them in on valuable information and giving them something that they can go away and use themselves once they've learned about it. But yeah, I think that's a really important subtle change, and Cognism are very good at it. And I think maybe you're not going to do it on a scale of analysing 10,000 cold calls, but investing in show content I think is really important. Alongside that, secondly, I think we touched on this a little bit as well, is don't hide the product. So this is more kind of product focused content. So I think even though it sounds really simple and it sounds really obvious to not hide the product for a lot of people, I think it's still very common in B2B SaaS that people think if you show the product too much, what you're going to have is people don't want to get on a sales call with you because they've seen it already. I think the absolute reverse is true. And I think Cognism actually had this issue years ago where they were probably introducing the product a bit too late in the buyer journey. And when they actually started making it friction-free, showing off the product, making it easy to access and experience the product, their results went through the roof. So I'd highly recommend investing in product content that communicates the value you offer to buyers and shows how they can get it. Interactive tours, demo videos, template libraries, UX imagery, product playbooks, foot in the door products to give a little bit of the product away, calculators and tools that like are built on kind of what the product delivers. All of these things are really important. So I think showing the product is 100% a big lesson I learned. I think any business can replicate. And then finally, just to round off, I think this is also important for smaller SaaS businesses. It's going to vary depending on your business, but I think this is something that can be done for a relatively low cost depending on your setup, and that's capturing demand with money keyword SEO. So the money keyword SEO strategy is about targeting organic keywords that high intent buyers are searching to find solutions to their problems. And the whole goal is just to appear organically in Google and in Bing for these searches. You're going to use content like listicles, competitor comparison blogs, and blogs that just answer high intent search queries. You still need to answer that query. Obviously, you want to rank. But what you can do is actually optimize these pages for conversion, these long form blogs and pieces, optimize it for conversion to capture these solution aware buyers while they're in a buying cycle, while they're researching options. And it's something that I think it's going to depend on your business, it's going to depend on your setup. But if you've got the ability to kind of invest in this over the long term, it can be a really effective tactic. And I think for Cognism, they generated about 400K in closed won business last year, and it was something to build up over time.
Awesome. Right, we're going to do some Q&A in a minute. If people are still here, apologies, we've gone a little bit over. We are very passionate about demand gen. But before we get into the Q&A, if you need an agency to create and execute a demand generation strategy, then go to the Rocket SaaS website, get in touch with us. We'll do a free strategy call about your existing marketing. We'll analyze what you're doing well, what you're not doing well, and then we'll map out a demand gen strategy for you and give you a proposal, or you can see our pricing on our website. So yeah, it's not just me and Jamie. We're not just consultants. We have an agency that executes on this demand generation strategy. So we will map out the strategy for your business to create a demand generation ongoing campaign. And we have the team of LinkedIn ads experts, Google ads experts, content creators, designers, web developers that will then create all of that content that we've talked about today and get it out there and support your growth. So if you are lacking in internal marketing resources, that's why we created Rocket SaaS to be your marketing department, or an extension of your marketing department if you've already got one. So let's see if anyone's still here after we've overrun. Hang on 1 second. Have I enabled Q&A? I hope so.
Yeah, there is a Q&A.
Can you see it? Yeah, there it is. Q&A. Right, here we go. Will the webinar be available to watch after it ends? Yes, it will. What's your view on anonymous case studies and testimonials? So yeah, I can answer that. It's obviously it's not ideal for them to be anonymous. You want your case studies to be trustworthy and genuine, but sometimes you can't. You know, sometimes people that work in like finance, for example, you're never going to get the client to sign off on it. So just push as hard as you can to get it. But if it's a problem, then it's fine. If that's all you've got, then that's all you can do. But yeah, I would push really, really hard to get it. I do find that a lot of British companies, actually I should stop sharing, shouldn't I? I find that a lot of British company or British people are a little bit shy to ask for case studies. But I recommend you just ask, and you just be honest, be vulnerable. Just say, look, I'm trying to grow my business. It would really help if you could just jump on a call and help us do a case study. Or if people are too busy, you just say, how about I write it for you and you sign it off? And people often go, oh yeah, great, just do that. And you can write it the way you want to write it. But yeah, anonymous case study is not ideal, but if that's what you can do, then yeah, it's definitely worth having. It's better than having nothing, that's for sure. Another question here from Owen. You're recommending weekly blogs. It's been suggested to us that daily blogs based around a specific content topic work better. What's your thoughts on that? Yeah, I mean, daily blogs, if you got the resources to do it, then great. I mean, pumping out daily blogs is probably more going to get a benefit from an SEO perspective. I would say that daily blogs, it can often confuse you in terms of what is resonating well and what you should be spinning off to create other content about. That's why I kind of prefer to do it weekly, because then we can focus attention on creating other assets. Because if you just go hard on blogs and you don't have the resources or the budget to then create other things like the videos and the webinars and the guides, then you're just going all in on blogs, which is a very SEO focused thing.
Yeah. I think I'll just quickly add to that as well. I think the main thing we kind of, especially for a smaller business, is more about consistency. So like ultimately what you can meet, if you can deliver high quality insights on a daily basis, fantastic. And you can keep to that, brilliant. But I think having consistency and being able to generate that content either on a weekly basis or on a daily basis, it's more about being consistent so that you have that content available. That's going to be super important.
Okay, another one here from an anonymous attendee. 7 million ARR business, currently very reliant on digital ads, which is pricey. We are trying to move more to this, I presume meaning demand gen, but people end up converting on digital ads regardless. Do you have any thoughts? Well, if people are converting on digital ads, you're going to get more people converting on the digital ads if you implement demand gen. So one of the challenges with demand gen is the attribution. It's hard, it's impossible to know exactly where people are converting from, because it is more of a holistic approach where people are following you for a long time, they're not showing intent. So what you find when you implement demand gen is that everything else performs better. So, for example, I've heard lots of people ask similar questions about salespeople. So they might say, oh, we've got a sales team that are bringing in all the leads, they're just hammering the phones, hammering the emails, but marketing's not working. When you implement demand gen, you find that the sales team starts smashing it. And I've had clients say to me, oh, your marketing campaigns are not working, Ryan. We want to turn off the LinkedIn ads that you're doing. And I say, yeah, but you're really smashing it. You're having the best quarter you've ever had. Say, oh, yeah, that's because our sales team smashed it this quarter. And I said, well, why have your sales team smashed it this quarter? Have you hired new salespeople? No, everything's the same. They're just having a really good quarter. I'm like, well, they're having a really good quarter because the marketing is working. The people that you're targeting are seeing the ads. People are getting that brand awareness. So when your sales team are reaching out to those people, they're closing more deals. So I kind of drifted away from your question there, but really demand gen should have a positive impact on everything that you're doing. So if your ads are already working well, you've got 7 million ARR, they're obviously doing quite well. So implementing demand gen should improve that even further. Jamie, you got anything to add on that one?
No, I think that pretty much covered it, to be honest, Ryan. I think that was pretty, yeah.
Okay, another one from Aston. Do you find that does what it says in the tin messaging works better than more creative messaging? Yes, 100%. So creative messaging, you read a creative sentence and you go, wow, it sounds cool. We've got a new buzzword there, but I don't know what you do. So I'd start by doing does what it says in the tin messaging. And then when you've got that nailed, add a sprinkle of creativity. But the clarity is the number one goal that you want to have here.
I've got a good example of this actually from my time at Cognism. Something they talk about a lot as well was their original tagline on their new website when they rebranded was connect with your perfect match. Cognism, if anyone doesn't know, it's a B2B data platform. And it basically, we thought it was super clever. We thought it was really cool, actually. But then we did a survey with Winter to review the homepage messaging, and people thought it was a dating site, which was obviously not what we was going for. So then we took that input and we changed the strapline, the main headline of the website to be, we give you B2B emails and mobile phone numbers of people you want to do business with. And I think within a month, we've kind of seen inbound demo volume increase by like 40% from people visiting the site. Nice. So yeah, it shows the effect really, just being clear.
Another one here. How would you add new leads to your list for demand gen if you're not running any ads? Good question. Jamie, if you didn't have any ads running, or do you have to have ads running?
So your list, how do you add new leads to your list for demand gen if you're not running any ads campaigns? So it depends on what you're doing with that list. So the list in a lead gen strategy would be super important because ultimately you're going to try and to hammer that list in your CRM, your marketing automation platform, to try and sort of push them and nurture them to buy. You can still have a list and you can still work that list under a demand gen approach, but the focus for us really is actually more on like being in the channels, all the channels that we think are most valuable, and going outbound to those people with our advertising, with our content. And so the emphasis is less on building a list. It's actually creating demand with our audience and then capturing that demand later on. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. I've got another question here about pricing. I think they're reluctant to show pricing on the website because the competitors and no one else is showing their pricing. What are your thoughts on that, Jamie? Do you have to show your pricing to do good demand gen, or is it?
No, you don't have to show your pricing. I would always recommend that anyway, if you show your pricing, most of the time, like there are some cases where it's not necessarily a good idea, but I'd say most of the time it's an incredibly good idea. And like we said earlier as well, it will help you capture demand easier. People have their expectations set already. You might qualify at bad leads as well, which will help with your sales team and not having bad leads in the funnel. But overall, no, you can still be top of mind. Educate buyers about your problems you solve, educate buyers about your product, And then ultimately, when they're ready to come, they're going to come to you. If you've done a good enough job, they're going to come to you, and you can capture that demand when they come in market. The pricing is an addition. It's something that can help, but it's not fundamental.
Cool. Well, I'm going to try and fly through the next ones. How do you do inbound sales for a category that people don't seem to search for, but many businesses need it? Well, the answer is social media ads. So if people are not Googling your solution, then you need to be targeting them on LinkedIn ads to introduce to explain the problem that they're suffering from and why it's a problem, educate them on how to solve the problem. And then once they think, oh, yeah, that is a problem, and yeah, I do need to solve that problem, then you retarget them and show them ads for your solution. So it's a common thing with SaaS companies, innovative businesses. People are not looking for it, they're not Googling. That means you need to go on social ads. Another one, just launched a SaaS, utilize my personal network to get the first 5 customers. What would be your next steps? It's a common story. Founders often utilize their network to get the first bunch of customers, and then it runs dry. So you need to start doing all the things that we've told you about in this webinar. I think it's the answer. So creating content, creating ads, attracting a new audience. It's pretty much all the things in this webinar, I would say.
Yeah, I think, like we said earlier as well, like actually nailing down who you're best placed to serve and who you can effectively reach is super important at that stage, because you're going to have limited resources, you have limited budget. So you need to focus all of your resources behind the people you're most likely to be able to influence. So I think, like we said earlier, although it sounds simple, defining your ICP is actually critical to a good demand generation approach.
Yeah. Next up, what is the best piece of the best piece of general SaaS marketing advice you've learned recently that you believe will remain relevant over the next 5 years? I'd probably say demand generation. That would definitely be the main one. Personal brands as well. I've heard a lot of people talking about personal branding at the moment. Obviously, people have been talking about personal brands for a long time, but with the kind of emergence of AI, and therefore lots of businesses going to be sounding the same, doing the same thing, offering the same services for the same low price that AI is just going to support. The one thing that is going to make your business stand out that your competitors don't have is your personal brand. So again, that's one of the reasons why Rocket SaaS has grown, is because I've leaned into my personal brand, and I've been getting out there over the last sort of 2-3 years. And that's really helped our business scale. And I've heard a lot of experts saying that's even going to be more so as lots of businesses become very similar with AI. Another one, what is your thoughts on calling out competitors in content? Yeah, love it. I did our previous webinar was all about how to steal clients from competitors. And look, it's a complicated one because it depends where you sit with your brand. It may not be a good look. We don't do it at Rocket SaaS, but for SaaS companies, it's often a good move. I think if you're a small startup with a small budget and you're going up against these big boy SaaS companies with loads of money and terrible customer service and bad pricing, that's your opportunity to steal their customers or get in there. So again, it's kind of a British thing. British people don't like doing it because we're so polite, but I
do think there's an approach to take here, because I think that the worry can be that you end up bashing your competitors and it's a bad look, which is a very valid concern. I think a good approach to take, particularly with competitor messaging or competitor ads, is around basically not communicating necessarily why you're better all the time. There can be ways you do that in a healthy way, but ultimately what you want to work out is, where are we meaningfully different to that competitor? Where are we meaningfully different in a way that we consistently win business on? And communicating that difference can be really important, because then you're not bashing the competitor. You're not saying they're bad. It's something you're saying they're this, we're that, and you're establishing you're a different solution for maybe a different segment or for different needs. But that can be one way to approach it.
Yeah, nice. Final question. Is your LinkedIn ad spend almost entirely content-based, or is it split to include any conversion level messaging or even broad messaging ad types? What sort of splits are you looking at budget-wise? You can take that one, Jamie.
Yeah, I can talk to that. So at the moment of Rocket SaaS, the approach that we kind of follow is very much rooted in Justin Rowe's model, which you can check him out on LinkedIn. It's very much modeled on that. So we have two kind of layers to our LinkedIn ads, which is you have the cold layer. And so in the cold layer, the whole kind of goal of this is we're either distributing relevant content, like Ryan was mentioned earlier, related to the problems that our agency solves, or potentially just advertising our core sort of service offering. And we're trying to drive people to content, website pages, landing pages. And the whole idea is to introduce who we are, introduce the problems we solve. And what we want to do, particularly as like we're a smaller business and we haven't got unlimited budget, we want to kind of build our remarketing audience. And what we want to do is build that remarketing audience. And this is the second layer, is the remarketing layer. So within the remarketing layer, that's where we want to actually speak to people and educate them further on who we are and what value we provide. So we use a mix of content to kind of, one, we fill the messaging gaps that a buyer needs to know to be able to come inbound to us and have a good conversation. So that will be things like social proof, our service offering, what differentiates us. And then we'll have next to that, alongside that layer of messaging that's kind of educating the buyer, we'll have conversion focused messaging. So that's going to be things like our strategy call, where you have our strategy call with Ryan to talk about your marketing and how you can help understand your problems and where that's going. But yeah, we kind of split it between cold, remarketing, and then we have very high intent campaigns where we're trying to capture demand from people who are in market, and a layer of content as well in the remarketing where we're trying to educate them about our business and the value we provide. And I think the split at the moment is around, I think we spend roughly 30% on the cold layer and about 70%. We spend about 70% on cold to build it out and get in front of people and get that reach, and about 30-40% on our remarketing.
Brilliant. So that is the end of the questions. Thank you so much for everybody's questions. They were really interesting. And yeah, I enjoyed that webinar. I hope you guys did too. Thank you so much for everyone that stuck around. We will be sending out the recording to all of you. So if you missed any of it, then just keep an eye on your inbox tomorrow. We'll be sending it out, I think, tomorrow to everybody. But yeah, thank you so much. If you want to learn more about us and our agency, go to rocket-saas.io. If you need support with your marketing, creating content, building demand, we're here to support you. So yeah, thanks so much. Have a wonderful rest of the day. See you next time.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Jamie.